One rancher's choice will echo across the prairie louder than gunfire. Colton Graves finds a dying native girl in the dust. And by dawn, 700 Apache warriors will ride to his fence, demanding justice or vengeance. And what's waiting behind those riders will test the limits of his courage and heart. The desert sun dipped low, casting the land in copper and blood. Colton Graves, a man hardened by years of solitude, was tending the last of his cattle near the edge of his property. The world was still, save for the soft sigh of wind through dry mesquite. But then he saw it, a small figure lying crumpled in the dust like a broken bird. Colton reined in his horse, heart tightening in his chest. He dismounted and approached slowly, boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. It was a child, a girl, barely clinging to life. Her dress was torn buckskin, her hair tangled and matted with grit. Her lips were cracked, her small hands curled like withered leaves. In this land, a man had two choices: ride on and save himself, or stop and risk everything. Every neighbor would have told him the same. Leave her be, Colton, ain't your trouble. But Colton Graves was not that kind of man. He knelt beside the girl, unstoppered his canteen and poured a trickle of water onto her lips. She stirred, drank greedily, then whispered, "Soft as the breeze. Little fawn." Her voice faded, but the name hung in the air like a prayer. Colton realized with a jolt. She was telling him who she was. He lifted her gently, cradling her as if she were made of glass, and carried her back to his cabin. There, he laid her on his cot, covered her with his wool blanket, and tried to steady his shaking hands. But when he stepped back onto his porch, the horizon was no longer empty. A dust cloud rose, stretching wide as a river. The ground trembled beneath the thunder of hooves. 700 Apache warriors rode toward his ranch, their war paint stark against the dawn, their weapons ready. At their head rode Chief Gray Wolf, his long silver hair braided, his face carved with the lines of a man who had seen too many battles. His eyes burned with a fire that no man could mistake. They circled the ranch, silent, deadly. The air grew heavy as the moment before a storm breaks. Chief Gray Wolf raised his hand, and the warriors halted as one. "You have something that belongs to my people," the chief called out, his English sure, his tone cold as mountain stone. "Bring her out, and perhaps you will live to see another sunrise." Colton stood tall on his porch, heart pounding like a drum. He had made his choice the night before. Now the plains would decide if that choice was his salvation or his doom. The sun crept higher, painting the prairie in hues of gold and red. 700 Apache warriors sat like statues upon their horses, their eyes sharp, their weapons steady. Colton Graves felt their gaze like the weight of a mountain, but he kept his rifle pointed down, showing his hands. A gun would do him no good against these odds. Chief Gray Wolf rode closer, slow and deliberate. His horse's hooves kicked up little clouds of dust that swirled around him like spirits. The chief dismounted with the grace of a man half his age, standing tall despite the years carved into his face. Colton stepped down from the porch, boots crunching on dry earth. He met Gray Wolf's gaze, seeing not rage but something deeper. Grief, perhaps, or the cold patience of a man used to waiting for justice. "I didn't steal her," Colton said, voice steady though his mouth was dry as bone. "Found her near dead in the dust. I gave her water. That's all." Gray Wolf studied him in silence, the wind tugging at his braids. Then his dark eyes flicked toward the cabin. "You will bring her out. I will see with my own eyes." Colton hesitated, not out of fear for himself, but for little Fawn. She was still so weak, her small body barely clinging to life. But what choice did he have? Refusing would mean certain death. "I'll fetch her," Colton said quietly. He turned, stepped inside the cabin, and knelt beside the cot. Little Fawn's breathing was shallow, but her eyes opened, wide and dark, when he touched her shoulder. "Easy now, girl," he murmured. "Your people are here." She blinked, then tried to sit up. Colton helped her, wrapping the blanket around her slender frame. When he carried her outside, A sound rippled through the ranks of warriors, a low murmur like the rustle of wind through dry grass. Gray Wolf stepped forward, his face carved from stone. When he saw the girl's face, the murmur fell to utter silence. "Little fawn," the chief said, voice softer now, filled with a father's sorrow and hope mingled. The girl's lips moved, too weak to speak aloud, but the chief understood. He reached out, and Colton set her gently on her feet. She swayed, but Gray Wolf steadied her with hands that trembled just slightly. But instead of relief, the chief's gaze hardened again as he looked at Colton. "You gave her water, shelter, but why did you not come to us?" Colton's throat felt tight. "She couldn't ride. I meant no harm. I meant to find you come morning." Gray Wolf's eyes narrowed, and for a long breath Colton felt the judgment of 700 warriors weighing upon him. He knew, words might save him, or they might not. The air between them seemed to hum, not with sound, but with the tension that falls before a storm. Colton Graves stood steady, though the weight of 700 stares pressed on him like the desert heat. His hands stayed at his sides, his rifle untouched. No good would come of steel now. Chief Gray Wolf's eyes never left him. Little Fawn leaned against her father's side, too weak to stand on her own, but her presence kept the warrior's arrows at bay, for the moment. "You speak of mercy, Colton Graves," the chief said at last, his voice low as distant thunder. "You say you meant no harm, but my people have known too many false words from white men, too many promises broken, too many children taken, never to be seen again." Colton felt the sting of those words. He couldn't deny them. The land itself seemed to remember the betrayals, the burned villages, the stolen lives. "I can't answer for other men's wrongs," Colton said, his voice rough with dust and truth. "I can only answer for mine. I found your daughter in the dirt, and I gave her what I could. Food, water, shelter. That's all I have to offer." The chief studied him, as if weighing the soul behind the words. But before he could reply, a younger warrior urged his horse forward. His face was painted in bold stripes of black and red, his eyes burning with fury. "Words mean nothing," the young warrior spat. "He kept her overnight. He could have brought her sooner. He could have sent word. The law of our people demands blood for such a crime." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered warriors. Some nodded, their hands tightening on bows and spears. The peace held by a thread, and Colton felt it fray beneath him. Gray Wolf lifted a hand, and the murmurs stilled. But his face was grave. "My son speaks for many," the chief said quietly. "They see a crime, even if your heart meant no harm. My people have suffered too long to trust easily." Colton's mind raced. He understood now that saving Little Fawn had been the easy part. The harder task lay before him, proving his heart without a fight. "But how?" "Let me prove it," Colton said, his voice firm despite the danger. "Give me a way to show I speak true." Gray Wolf's eyes darkened and he nodded slowly. "There is a way," he said, "but it may cost you more than your blood." Colton straightened, ready to hear. "Whatever the price." The prairie wind carried the chief's words far beyond the circle of warriors, as if the land itself bore witness. Colton Graves stood tall, though inside he felt the weight of what was coming. Chief Gray Wolf stepped closer, his silver-streaked hair stirring in the breeze. His voice was low, but it carried power that stilled even the restless horses. "My people do not seek war where there is no need," he said, "but neither can we let a slight against our honor go unchallenged. You took in my daughter, and for that I owe a debt. But you kept her from us, and for that a price must be paid." Colton met the chief's gaze, steady and unflinching. "Name it." Gray Wolf's dark eyes searched his face for signs of fear or deceit. Finding none, he nodded. "You will ride with us. Leave your rifle, your horse, your home behind. You will come as a man alone, as one who must prove his word. For a day and a night, you will walk with my people as we return to our camp. You will place your life in our hands, as you placed my daughter's life in yours. If you are honest, you will see dawn again. If not—" The chief let the words hang in the air, unfinished. But their meaning was clear as the noonday sun. Colton felt the eyes of the warriors upon him, waiting, watching. A white man walking into an Apache camp with no weapon? Some would call it suicide. But Colton saw no other road forward. He nodded once. So be it. A low murmur spread among the warriors. Surprise, perhaps respect. The young firebrand who had called for blood scowled but said nothing. Gray Wolf raised his hand again. We ride. And so, with the first true heat of morning rising from the earth, Colton Graves left behind his cabin, his rifle leaning by the door, and walked forward. Little Fawn, wrapped in her father's blanket, was lifted gently onto a horse. She turned once to look at Colton, her eyes soft with something like gratitude. The great column of warriors moved as one, 700 strong, with Colton walking in their midst, unarmed, alone, but unbowed. The prairie stretched wide and empty, the sun rising higher, baking the land to gold and dust. 700 Apache warriors moved in near silence, their horses' hooves muffled on the dry ground. At their center walked Colton Graves, unarmed, alone, but upright as any man could be. The weight of so many eyes followed him. Every step he took, he felt their gaze, measuring him, judging whether his courage was real or foolishness. Some warriors rode close, their faces unreadable behind war paint. Others hung back, whispering in their tongue. Colton's boots kicked up small puffs of dust with each stride. His throat was dry, but he didn't ask for water. Pride kept him steady, though the heat pressed down like a heavy blanket. Little Fawn rode near the front, wrapped in her father's blanket, cradled before Chief Gray Wolf on his horse. From time to time she looked back at Colton, her dark eyes thoughtful. By midday the land shimmered with heat. The warriors paused at a small creek hidden in a fold of the earth. As they dismounted and let their horses drink, Gray Wolf beckoned Colton forward. "You kept your word so far," the chief said, his voice low, "but my son does not trust you. There are those among us who would see you fall, no matter your deeds." Colton glanced at the young warrior, the chief's son, who watched him with eyes like hot coals. "I'm not here to change minds," Colton said, "only to do what's right." Gray Wolf studied him a moment, then handed him a gourd of water. "Then drink. You'll need your strength before this day is done." Colton accepted it, drank deep, and nodded his thanks. He sensed the chief's respect was real, but he also sensed that the dangers of this ride weren't only from the white man's world. As they rode on, the land rose toward the distant hills. The warriors spoke little, but Colton felt tension in the air. Something was coming, something more than a trial of honor. And as the sun began its slow fall toward the west, Colton realized he was not just walking into their camp. He was walking into the heart of a storm he could not yet see. The sun dipped lower, painting the prairie in long shadows that reached like fingers toward the hills. The Apache war party rode steady, but the air grew heavier, as if the land itself sensed what approached. Colton Graves kept pace, every step stirring dust that clung to his boots, his throat raw from thirst and grit. Though Chief Gray Wolf had offered water at the creek, Colton hadn't asked again. Pride, or perhaps the quiet understanding that every test of endurance was part of the price he must pay. The column began to slow as they neared a stand of cottonwoods, where the land folded into a hidden valley. It was here, Colton guessed, that the Apache camp lay, a place no outsider was meant to see. But before they reached it, a low whistle rippled through the ranks. The warriors halted as one, tense as bowstrings. Chief Gray Wolf raised a hand, his gaze sweeping the horizon. Colton felt it too, the sense of being watched. The hair at the back of his neck bristled. Then he saw them, shapes in the rocks above, distant but unmistakable. Another band of riders, maybe 24 or more, their figures dark against the fading sky. Gray Wolf's son, the hot-blooded warrior who'd called for Colton's death, urged his horse forward. His voice rang out in their tongue, sharp and commanding. The riders above did not move. Colton turned to Grey Wolf. "Trouble?" The chief's jaw tightened. "Raiders!" "Not of my people. They follow us, hoping to strike when we are weary." Colton's mind raced. If these raiders attacked, they'd aim first for what they saw as weakest. Him, an unarmed white man in their midst, would be easy prey. Or so they'd think. Grey Wolf glanced at him, as if reading his thoughts. "Stay close, Colton Graves. This is not your fight, but it may find you all the same." And so they rode on, slower now, every eye watching the rocks, every hand near a weapon. The raiders shadowed them, as the light faded, like wolves waiting for night. Colton felt it in his bones. Before the stars rose high, blood would spill on this ground, but whose, he could not yet say. Darkness fell swift and heavy across the prairie. The moon, a thin sliver, gave little light. The Apache war party made camp in the hidden valley, where a stream whispered over stone, and cottonwoods stood like silent sentinels. Colton Graves sat apart, near the edge of the firelight. He felt the weight of 700 eyes upon him, some curious, some wary, and a few like those of the chief's son, sharp with distrust. Chief Grey Wolf's warriors moved with quiet purpose, tending horses, sharpening blades, speaking in low voices that carried the rhythm of old ways. But beneath the calm, tension simmered. The raiders had not shown themselves since dusk, but everyone knew they lingered close. Grey Wolf approached, settling beside Colton with the slow grace of a man who had seen many winters and survived them all. "You walk among us with courage," the chief said, his voice low, meant only for Colton's ears. "But courage alone does not stop arrows." Colton met his gaze. "I didn't ask for this, but I'll see it through." The chief nodded. "I believe you, but not all do. My son sees only a trespasser, a man who kept his sister from us." Colton's brow furrowed. His heart clenched at the word. Sister. Little Fawn wasn't just Grey Wolf's daughter. She was sister to the very man who wanted Colton's blood. It all made bitter sense now, the young warrior's fury, his demands for vengeance. Before Colton could reply, a soft sound broke the stillness. A voice, no louder than a breath. He turned and saw her, Little Fawn, wrapped in her blanket, standing in the firelight's edge. She came to him, small and fragile, but her eyes steady. She spoke in Apache, and Grey Wolf translated. She says, "You saved her when the land would have claimed her, that you gave water, food, shelter, and asked nothing." The girl's gaze met Colton's, and though she said no more, her meaning was clear as the stars above. And in that moment, Colton felt hope stir, thin as a blade of grass but alive. But far off, in the darkness beyond the camp, came the cry of a night bird, and with it, the sure knowledge that the raiders were not done with them yet. The night pressed in close, thick with waiting. The fire crackled softly, its light dancing on the faces of warriors, on the silver threads in Chief Grey Wolf's hair, on the determined set of Colton Graves' jaw. Then came the sound, soft at first, like the sigh of the wind through dry grass. But Colton knew better. He rose, his body tense, every sense alert. The warriors heard it too. A whisper of movement, a soft clink of stone against boot, the telltale signs of men trying to move like ghosts. Grey Wolf stood, his voice low but sharp. "They come." Out of the dark, like wolves at the edge of a herd, the raiders fell upon the camp. A hail of arrows sliced the night air, thudding into earth and tree. Shadows broke from the rocks, charging with knives and clubs, their eyes wild with hunger for plunder. Colton acted without thinking. He grabbed a fallen spear, planted his feet, and met the rush of the nearest raider. The man came fast, blade flashing in the dim light, but Colton turned the strike aside and knocked him to the ground with the shaft. Around him, the Apache warriors fought with silent fury, blades flashing, bows singing, their movements sure and swift. The camp filled with the clash of steel, the grunt of effort, the crack of bone against wood. Colton's blood pounded in his ears, but he held his ground, driving back one attacker, then another. He fought not like a man defending himself, but like a man defending his place among these people, a man proving that his word was more than breath. And then came the twist of fate he hadn't expected. Out of the melee, the chief's son, the fierce young warrior who had wanted Colton dead, stumbled, his arm bleeding, his footing lost on the rocky slope. A raider lunged at him from behind, blade raised for the kill. Without pausing, Colton sprang forward, driving his borrowed spear between the raider and his prey. The two men tumbled in a tangle, and Colton felt the edge of a knife slice his shoulder before he threw the attacker clear. The raider fled into the night's shadows, leaving Colton breathless, bleeding, but standing. The young warrior stared at him, shock in his dark eyes. For a heartbeat, no words passed between them. Then the boy nodded once, sharp and respectful. The raiders' courage broke at last. With a cry, they fled into the darkness, leaving behind their dead. And in the fire's glow, Chief Gray Wolf met Colton's gaze. In that look was something new. Not suspicion, not anger, but the beginning of trust. The first pale light of dawn crept over the hills, washing the valley in soft gold. Smoke from the campfires curled into the quiet morning air. The ground bore the marks of the night's struggle. Broken arrows, trampled earth, a few lifeless raiders left where they'd fallen. Colton Graves stood apart, the cut on his shoulder bound with a strip of cloth given by one of the Apache women. His body ached, but he stood straight, his gaze on the rising sun. Chief Gray Wolf approached, his steps slow but sure. His son walked beside him, the young warrior Colton had saved, his wounded arm now bandaged with care. Where once there had been fire in the boy's eyes, now there was respect. "You fought well," Gray Wolf said. "You risked yourself for my son, for my people. You had no reason. Yet you did." Colton shook his head. "Had plenty of reason, Chief. A man does what's right, or he isn't much of a man at all." The chief studied him a long moment. Then he spoke words that rang through the morning like a bell. "Colton Graves, last night you walked among us as one under trial. Today you stand as a brother." A murmur rose among the warriors, not of protest, but of acceptance. The shift was clear. Where once Colton had been an outsider, now they saw him as a man who'd proved his heart. But Gray Wolf was not finished. He turned to his son, then back to Colton. "There is one thing more. My son asks it. A way to bind this peace so no man questions it." Colton tensed. "And what way is that?" The chief's son stepped forward. His voice was strong, despite the bandage on his arm. "You will come to our camp. And when the sun sets again, you will stand before our council. You will be given a place at our fire, or you will be given the choice to leave, with safe passage. But no man can say you did not honor our ways." Colton hesitated, the weight of it heavy on his mind. He'd meant only to help a dying child. Now he was bound to a people's trust, a bond he hadn't sought, but couldn't in good conscience refuse. "I'll come," he said simply. Gray Wolf nodded, satisfaction in his eyes. But as they broke camp, Colton couldn't shake the feeling that the greatest test still lay ahead. And somewhere beyond those hills, unseen eyes watched and plotted. By midday, the Apache war party crested a ridge and rode down into a hidden valley, where smoke from cook fires drifted lazily into the clear sky. The Apache camp lay below, dozens of lodges and shelters of hide and wood set along a stream that glimmered in the sun. Children played near the water's edge, elders sat in council circles, and women tended to daily work. Colton Graves walked at the center of it all, his boots raising small puffs of dust, his heart beating slow but steady. The weight of the past days hung on him, but he kept his head high. The warriors rode ahead, dismounting and leading their horses to water. As Colton entered the camp on foot, hundreds of eyes turned his way. Some curious, some cautious. A white man in their midst was no common sight. Chief Gray Wolf led him to a great lodge at the camp's heart, its entrance marked by carved poles and feathers that swayed in the breeze. Before they could enter, a voice rang out behind them. "Well, I'll be damned. Colton Graves, I never figured to see you walk into an Apache camp alive." Colton froze. That voice! It clawed at old memories he'd tried to bury. Slowly he turned. A man stepped from the shadows of a nearby lodge. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a grin that didn't reach his cold eyes. His coat was dusty cavalry blue, but the insignia had been stripped away. A scar ran down his cheek, a reminder of battles long past. "Harlan Mallory," Colton said, his voice like gravel. Harlan chuckled, spreading his hands as if in welcome. "Didn't expect to find me here, did you? The world's funny that way. A man runs from his past, and sometimes it's waiting for him where he least expects it." Gray Wolf watched the exchange in silence, but Colton saw the flicker of recognition in the chief's eyes, and perhaps a shadow of unease. "What are you doing here, Mallory?" Colton asked. His voice was low, wary. "Same as you, I reckon. Trying to stay alive. Made myself useful to these folks after the army decided I wasn't their kind of soldier anymore." But Colton knew better. Harlan Mallory was a man who'd make himself useful only as long as it served him, and no longer. And now, as the Apache prepared to honor Colton's deeds, Mallory's sudden presence threatened to stir old grudges, old betrayals, and perhaps ignite a fire that no man could stop. Night settled soft over the Apache camp, the stars bright and cold above. The council fire burned at the heart of the village, casting long shadows on the faces gathered around it. Colton Graves sat beside Chief Gray Wolf, the heat of the flames warming his weary bones. All around, warriors, elders, and women watched in silence, waiting for the words that would decide the stranger's fate. Little Fawn sat near her father, her dark eyes shining in the firelight, watching Colton with quiet hope. And across the circle, Harlan Mallory leaned against a lodge post, his arms crossed, his mouth curled in that half-grin Colton remembered too well, the kind that always meant trouble. Chief Gray Wolf rose, his voice steady and deep. "Colton Graves came to us as a man under trial. He gave shelter to my daughter. He walked among us without weapon or claim. He fought at our side, and so tonight we ask, shall he be counted as a friend, or turned from our fire?" A murmur rippled through the circle. Some nodded, some hesitated. Colton felt the weight of each gaze, felt the judgment in every quiet breath. Then Mallory stepped forward. His voice was smooth as oil on water. "Begging your pardon, Chief Gray Wolf," he drawled, "but maybe your people ought to know a little more about this man you're about to call friend." Gray Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Speak, but speak true." Mallory turned to the gathering, his words slippery as a snake. "This man, Colton Graves, he wasn't always so noble. Once he rode with men who burned Indian camps. Once he took pay from men who wanted this land for their own. How do I know? I was there." Gasps rose from some in the crowd. Colton felt the blood drain from his face. Not because Mallory lied, but because he twisted pieces of the truth. Long ago, Colton had ridden with the crew he left behind the day he saw their true colors. But the stain of those days was hard to wash clean, and Mallory knew it. Colton stood slowly, facing the fire, facing them all. "There was a time I rode with the wrong men," he said, voice low but clear, "and I walked away from them when I saw what they were. Ask yourselves, would a man with poison in his heart have saved Little Fawn? Would he have bled for your son? I came here with nothing but my word, and I've kept it." The circle fell silent. Gray Wolf looked from Colton to Mallory, and then to his people. "This is not a night for old grudges," the chief said at last. "This is a night to judge a man by what he does, not what others say of him." But Colton saw it in Mallory's eyes. The fight wasn't over. The man had more schemes to play before the dawn. The council fire crackled, sending sparks up into the night, but the warmth of its glow could not chase the chill that settled over the circle. Colton Graves stood tall, though he felt the weight of suspicion Mallory's words had sown. Harlan Mallory stepped back into the shadows, his grin hidden now, but Colton could feel the man's scheming mind working. Grey Wolf held up a hand, calling the circle to order once more. "The council will speak at dawn," the chief declared. "Let no man raise voice or weapon this night. Let the spirits guide our dreams." The gathering slowly broke apart, warriors returning to their lodges, families drawing close, the quiet of the camp returning like a blanket over the land. But Colton's heart remained restless. He stepped away from the fire, seeking the edge of camp where the stars seemed brighter, the air clearer. There, as he gazed at the endless sky, a soft step behind him made him turn. It was Little Fawn. She came to him with a shy, uncertain smile, her small hands holding out a strip of leather decorated with tiny beads. A token of thanks, simple yet made with care. "For you," she said, her voice no louder than the breeze. Colton took it, his throat tight. "Thank you, Little Fawn. I'll wear it proud." But even as he tied the token around his wrist, the peace of the moment was broken. A flicker of movement caught his eye, a figure slipping between lodges, keeping to the dark. Mallory! Colton narrowed his eyes. The man was up to something that wouldn't wait for dawn. Without a sound, Colton followed. He moved like a shadow, staying to the edges, his boots silent on the soft earth. Mallory's path led him toward the corral, where the horses stirred nervously, sensing trouble. And then Colton saw it. Mallory crouched by a tethered horse, working at the knots, readying to steal away under the cover of night. And with him, likely any chance Colton had of clearing his name. Colton stepped from the shadows. "Where are you headed, Mallory?" Mallory froze, then straightened slowly, his hand resting near the hilt of a hidden knife. His grin returned, sharp as a wolf's. "Just making sure I've got a way out when this all turns sour, friend. Thought you'd understand." Colton shook his head. "A man who schemes in the dark ain't no friend of mine." The tension coiled tight between them, the night air heavy with what might come next. The horses shifted restlessly, their breath misting in the cold night air. The moon, thin as a sliver of bone, cast faint light on the two men facing each other. Colton Graves, unarmed but unyielding, and Harlan Mallory, hand hovering near the knife hidden at his belt. "Don't do it, Mallory," Colton said, voice low, steady. "You'll only bring more shame on yourself." Mallory chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Shame? I stopped caring about that when the army left me to rot on the frontier. I'm looking out for myself now, and if I have to cut you down to do it, so be it." Colton took a slow step forward, hands raised, palms open. "You run tonight. You make things worse for me, and for them. These people gave us shelter. Don't repay it with betrayal." Mallory's fingers twitched near the knife. The horses stirred, hooves striking stone, as if they too sensed the storm about to break. But before steel could flash, another voice cut through the night. "Enough!" Chief Grey Wolf stepped from the shadows, his son at his side, bow in hand. Behind them, half a dozen warriors emerged, silent as the night itself, arrows nocked and ready. Mallory froze, his smirk fading. His hand dropped away from the knife, too late for trickery. Grey Wolf's gaze was hard as flint. "You would steal from us, flee like a coward, betray one who calls you brother. Is this the white man's way?" Mallory swallowed hard, words failing him at last. Colton stood tall, though his heart pounded. "He speaks for himself, Chief. Not for me. I stayed because I gave my word." The warriors surrounded Mallory, disarming him, binding his hands with rawhide thongs. Mallory didn't fight. Not now, not with the sharp eyes and sharper arrows upon him. Grey Wolf turned to Colton. "Your honor is shown not in words tonight, but in what you chose to do. This man's path ends here. Yours. Your path is still yours to walk." Colton let out a slow breath. The night's danger had passed, but dawn would bring its own tests. Dawn crept slow and pale over the hills, painting the Apache camp in soft gold. The fire at the center of the council circle smoldered low, smoke curling into the chill morning air. Warriors, elders, women, and children gathered once more, their faces calm but watchful. Colton Graves stood tall beside Chief Gray Wolf, the weight of the night's events heavy on his shoulders but his gaze steady. Mallory sat bound near the edge of the circle, his head bowed, the defiance drained from him. Gray Wolf raised his hands, calling for silence. The camp hushed, the only sound the soft nickering of horses and the crackle of embers. "This man, Colton Graves, came among us as a stranger," the chief began. "He gave water to my daughter, shelter to one in need. He walked unarmed beside us, fought at our side, saved my son's life. When another sought to betray our trust, Colton Graves stood against him." A murmur of approval rippled through the gathering. Even the chief's son, who had once called for blood, now nodded with quiet respect. Gray Wolf continued, his voice strong. "This council judges that Colton Graves has honored our ways. He is a friend to our people. Let none speak against it." A cheer rose, not loud, but heartfelt, a sound of welcome given rarely and with meaning. Little Fawn smiled from where she sat beside the women, relief bright in her eyes. Gray Wolf turned to Colton. "You are free to go, Colton Graves, but if you wish it, you may stay. Take a place among us, ride with us, share in our fires and our hunts. Few white men have earned such an offer." Colton felt his heart catch. The offer was more than kindness. It was a bond of trust, a path he hadn't expected, a chance to belong after so long walking alone. But before he could answer, Gray Wolf added, "There is no shame if you choose to return to your own people. The choice is yours, and none will judge you." The camp waited, the morning sun warm on Colton's face as he weighed the road before him. Colton Graves stood silent, the sun's first full rays lighting the faces of those gathered around the council fire. His heart beat steady, but his mind turned like a wagon wheel in soft sand. Here was a choice few men ever faced. He had come as a stranger, an outsider, and now he was offered a place among a people who judged him not for his past, but for his deeds. A place at their fires, a place in their trust. He looked at Little Fawn, who watched him with hopeful eyes. He saw the chief's son, once his fiercest accuser, now standing with quiet respect. And he saw Chief Gray Wolf, waiting without pressure, a man who understood that a choice made in haste was no choice at all. Colton took a slow breath. "Chief Gray Wolf," he said, his voice carrying clear in the morning air. "I never thought to find family again out here on this hard land. Your offer humbles me, and I would be proud to ride with your people, to learn your ways, to stand as a brother among you." A ripple of approval moved through the gathered warriors. Gray Wolf smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened the lines of his face. But before the chief could speak, the quiet was shattered by the thunder of hooves beyond the ridge. A dust cloud rose, riders approaching fast. Colton's hand went to his belt out of habit, though he bore no weapon. The Apache warriors were already on their feet, bows and spears at the ready. From over the rise came the glint of sunlight on badges, the blue of cavalry coats. A detachment of soldiers, maybe 30 strong, riding hard toward the camp. And at their head, a man Colton recognized even at this distance, Captain Enoch, the very officer who had once led the men Colton had ridden with. The same officer who had made promises of peace, then broken them with fire and blood. Gray Wolf's face darkened. "They come for us." Colton felt the weight of his choice shift. A heartbeat ago he had chosen to stay, to walk a new path. Now, that path was already under threat. And in that moment he knew. The test was not over. It had only just begun. The thunder of hooves grew louder as the soldiers swept down from the ridge, their sabers glinting in the morning sun. Dust billowed behind them like a storm cloud, and their shouts echoed across the valley. Colton Graves stood his ground at the center of the Apache camp, his heart beating hard, but his hands open and empty. Around him, Gray Wolf's warriors formed a line, bows drawn, spears steady, their faces set like stone. The peace of moments ago now hung by the thinnest thread. Captain Enoch reined in his horse at the edge of the camp, his eyes sweeping the scene. He saw Colton first, his brow furrowing in confusion. Then his gaze shifted to the warriors, the council fire, the bound figure of Mallory still seated beneath the lodge pole. "Well, well," Enoch called out, his voice sharp as a whip. "Graves, I didn't expect to find you here, breaking bread with savages." Colton stepped forward, his voice firm. "This isn't what you think, Captain. There's been no crime here. These people showed honor, more than I've seen from most men in uniform." Enoch sneered. "You always did have a soft spot for lost causes." "Step aside, Colton. We're here to take that bandit off your hands," he gestured at Mallory, "and to see that this camp's no threat to the territory." Grey Wolf spoke then, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Your quarrel is not with us. We seek no war. But we will defend our homes." The captain's eyes narrowed. His hand rested near his pistol. "That sounds like a threat, Chief." Colton raised his voice, stepping between them. "No threat, Enoch. No need for blood. Mallory's yours. Take him. But leave these people be. They've done nothing but show me mercy." The soldiers shifted in their saddles, uncertain. The tension crackled like a storm about to break. Enoch's jaw clenched. He looked at the line of warriors, at the set of Colton's shoulders, at Mallory, who now looked very small and very afraid. "Fine," the captain spat. "We take the prisoner. But you, Graves, you're coming with us. I want answers for what you're doing out here, and I aim to get them." The Apache watched, waiting to see what Colton would choose. The world he'd left behind, or the new one that had offered him a place. Colton drew a slow breath, knowing the next words from his mouth might decide the fate of everyone standing here. The valley held its breath. Dust settled in slow spirals as 30 soldiers stared down 700 Apache warriors, and between them stood Colton Graves, a man caught between two worlds. Captain Enoch's words hung in the morning air like the cocked hammer of a pistol. "You're coming with us, Graves. I'll have your answers, one way or another." Colton lifted his chin, eyes steady on the captain. "You'll have my answer now, Enoch. I stay. I stand with these people. I gave my word, and I'll not break it for you or any man in uniform." The soldiers stirred, murmurs passing through their ranks. This wasn't what they'd expected. A white man refusing an officer's command? That alone would have earned trouble. But to do it standing among Apache warriors? That was near unheard of. Enoch's face darkened, his pride stung. "You're a fool, Graves. You think they'll keep you safe? When the smoke clears, you'll hang with them." Grey Wolf stepped forward then, his voice calm but firm. "Enough. No more threats. You have your man. Take him. But if you raise a hand against Colton Graves or any of my people, you will see what it means to rouse the bear." Enoch hesitated. He wasn't a coward, but he wasn't blind either. 700 warriors, every bow strung, every spear ready. The odds weren't in his favor. Finally, with a snarl, he barked an order. "Bind that prisoner. We're leaving." 2 soldiers dismounted and hauled Mallory to his feet. The man didn't even try to struggle now. His schemes had run dry. Before they mounted up, Enoch turned once more to Colton. "This isn't over. You'll answer for this, Graves." Colton stood tall, hands at his sides, heart pounding but unshaken. "I just did." The soldiers wheeled their horses and rode out, dust and anger rising behind them. When they were gone, the camp let out a slow breath. Grey Wolf placed a hand on Colton's shoulder. "You chose your path well, and now we walk it together." The dust of the departing soldiers faded into the horizon, leaving behind a quiet so deep it seemed to press against the ears. The Apache camp stirred slowly, warriors lowering their bows, mothers calling to children who had watched the standoff with wide, silent eyes. Colton Graves stood where he was, feeling the weight of what had just passed. His heart still raced, but his mind was clear. There had been no other choice, not if he meant to stand by his word. Chief Grey Wolf turned to him, his face solemn. "You have done a thing few would dare, Colton Graves. You stood between two storms and kept the peace for this day." Colton gave a small nod. "For this day," he echoed, knowing the chief spoke true. The danger hadn't passed, not truly. Around them the camp moved with purpose. Scouts were sent to watch the trails. Sentries were posted on the ridges. The Apache knew well that soldiers didn't like to be defied, and that Enoch might come back with more men and less patience. Gray Wolf walked with Colton through the camp as the people began to prepare. Women tended fires and gathered stores. Young warriors checked their weapons, sharpened blades, repaired bowstrings. All understood what might lie ahead. At the edge of camp, Little Fawn ran to Colton's side, slipping her small hand into his. She looked up at him with a shy smile. No words, but none were needed. In her eyes was trust. Colton looked down at her, then out toward the hills where the soldiers had gone. He felt it in his bones. The peace he'd fought for was a fragile thing, like a clay pot balanced on a narrow ledge. And somewhere beyond those hills, Captain Enoch's anger smoldered like a prairie fire, waiting for a gust of wind. Nightfall draped the valley in velvet shadows. The fires in the Apache camp burned low, their glow soft against the walls of the lodges. The stars blinked awake, bright and sharp in the clear mountain air. Colton Graves sat near the main fire, his back to a broad stone, eyes on the dark hills beyond. Little Fawn lay curled beside her father, finally asleep, her small hand resting on Gray Wolf's blanket. But Colton could not rest, not with the weight of the day heavy in his chest, not with the memory of Captain Enoch's parting threat still ringing in his ears. The camp was quiet but not at ease. Sentries kept watch on the ridges, their silhouettes barely visible against the sky. Warriors moved like ghosts, checking bowstrings, oiling blades, speaking in low voices. The people knew what Colton knew. The storm hadn't passed. It was only gathering strength. Then came a sound that drew every eye, the sharp, steady beat of a horse at full gallop. A scout, riding hard into camp. The horse was lathered with sweat, its flanks heaving. The young rider slid from the saddle and ran straight to Gray Wolf and Colton. "They come," the scout said, breathless. "Enoch, with twice as many soldiers as before. They ride this way. They will be here by dawn." The camp stirred. Warriors rising, faces hardening, women gathered their children close. Gray Wolf's jaw tightened, his eyes dark as storm clouds. "We have little time," the chief said, "and no room for error." Colton felt his gut twist. The choice he'd made had bound him to these people, and now that bond would be tested in fire. "Whatever comes," he said quietly, "I'll stand with you." Gray Wolf placed a hand on his shoulder. "And we will stand with you, Colton Graves. No man faces this alone." In the darkness, the warriors began to prepare, not with panic, but with the grim resolve of those who knew that at dawn, the land itself would bear witness to their courage. The first streaks of gray touched the eastern sky, and with them came the distant thunder of hooves, the sound of Captain Enoch's soldiers riding hard, their numbers doubled, their intent clear. The valley that had cradled peace now braced for war. Colton Graves stood at the center of the Apache camp, his sleeves rolled, his hands steady as he worked alongside Gray Wolf and the warriors. Together they laid out their defense, not just with weapons, but with the land itself. They had chosen their ground well. The valley's narrow mouth would funnel the soldiers into a tight space, where their numbers would mean less. Rocks were rolled into place, creating barriers and traps. Hidden trenches were dug in the dark hours before dawn. Gray Wolf turned to Colton. "We will fight for our homes, our children, our way of life, but we will not throw away lives needlessly. If there is another way," Colton nodded. "I'll try." When the soldiers appeared at the ridge, their lines stretched wide, sabers flashing, rifles glinting in the rising sun. Enoch rode at their head, his face set, his anger plain. Colton stepped forward, hands raised high. He walked alone, out into the open between the two forces, the dawn light catching the dust of his boots. "Enoch," he called, "you don't have to do this. There's no cause here but pride and fear. Turn your men back before blood stains this ground." Enoch reined in, glaring down at him. "You defend them over your own kind? You're a traitor, Graves." "I stand for what's right," Colton answered, his voice clear. "And you still have a choice. Don't make this a massacre." For a heartbeat, the world held still. The wind died. The birds hushed. The land seemed to wait. Then, against hope, Enoch hesitated. His men, seeing him pause, wavered too. And in that fragile space between violence and reason, Grey Wolf and his warriors stepped from cover, weapons lowered, showing they too wished peace, if it could be had. Enoch's face darkened further, but he saw what his men saw: an unwinnable fight, a pointless slaughter. He spat into the dust. "This isn't over," he said, "but it ends today." With that he wheeled his horse, and the soldiers began to withdraw, their anger trailing behind them like dust on the wind. As silence fell again, Grey Wolf stood beside Colton. The chief's voice was soft but strong. "You kept your word, Colton Graves, and because of it, many will see the sun set tonight." Colton looked out across the valley, the rising sun warm on his face. He had come as a stranger, but stayed as a brother.